going to stay in Iraq so long as the government wants us there.
Did you inhale?
That was the point.
We have to draw definitions. What is off-color, what is blue, and what is out-and-out dirty.
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Jerry Doyle grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Has a 10-year career on Wall Street. A long list of movie and TV roles, including the character Michael Garibaldi for 110 episodes on the Emmy Award-winning sci-fi series Babylon 5. He's an honorary naval aviator and F-16 test pilot.
If I break it, they can take it out of my pay.
And ran as a Republican for the U.S. House of Representatives in California.
Either I'm dead right or I'm crazy.
You want to talk politics, pop culture, and current events?
Oh, yes. I need the distraction.
Let's do it on the Jerry Doyle Show.
Like the man said, let's do it on the Jerry Doyle Show, so let's do it, shall we? JD here, your 6'3" ATM of information. The PIN, 800-876-4123. Jesse and Dancing Charles working the booth. D Squared taking your calls at 800-876-4123. Emails at the website, jerrydoyle.com. Whole question up there for you today. Do you believe the 700-mile fence along the U.S.-Mexican border will ever be built? 83% right now say no. 17%. Well, we'll get you to figure out what the right answer is. This is a story out of the Washington Times. They say here in the headline, hey, guess what? Congress is open to passing a bill on immigration. Now the real numbers are coming out. How many people out there believe that 12 million is the number of illegals that are in this country? Now they're starting to float it up towards 20. The number will hit 25. Soon it'll be 30, and it'll be, wow, they're coming out of the shadows, because that's what they're saying in this article, is we have to bring them out of the shadows. Do you believe that the wall along the U.S.-Mexican border will ever be built? Give us a call at 800-876-4123. Later in the week, we're going to get the Iraq Study Group out, the group of learned souls that are going to help President Bush decide what direction to go in Iraq. Let's see. What's the youngest person on the commission? 64 years old?
Yeah,
they got a diplomat on there named Vernon Jordan. I'm sure he's got some really good advice. They've got Sandra Day O'Connor, which would lend me to believe that the legal mind is on there to try and ensure that whatever decision they come to is met well in the international community. And the fix is in. We've been talking about it more and more. Lobbyist Vernon Jordan, what's he lobbying for? Another job, next administration? Working for the team of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama? Hey, Barack came out and said he smoked marijuana, and he inhaled, did he not? On Jay Leno?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He did.
He came clean.
He came clean with the American people, unlike Bill Clinton, who said, well, try to put, I didn't inhale. That's when we knew he was a liar right off the bat. Barack Obama, he said, at least he's honest about it in clip 12. Asked if he inhaled. Listen to this.
Did you inhale?
Yeah. Well, I was telling somebody asked this question. I said, that was the point.
That was the point. That was the point. And he said he admitted to smoking in his book back when he was in high school, and he doesn't mean to make light of smoking marijuana. Listen to clip 13.
I don't mean to make light of it, but I do think that one of the things that hopefully you try to do when you're in public life is to acknowledge, look, I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes. And the question is, do you learn from your mistakes? Right. Do you grow from your mistakes? And hopefully, I have.
Well, I've been watching this, I guess, rollout of Barack Obama, and I think the guy is a great speech he gave. I think he presents himself really well. I've heard people in talk radio and on TV say some stupid things about Barack Obama, is that they desperately want a successful black candidate for president. I guess helping to move race relations along in this country. No, what they want is someone who's going to lead the country. Now, a guy who's been a senator for 2 years, I don't think necessarily has the set skills to navigate Washington, and that's the key. He might be good enough to be president, but is he good enough to overcome the shenanigans that take place on Capitol Hill? Here's one of the things I see taking place with Barack Obama. And I'm an outsider kind of guy. When you look at the movie Dave, to me, there's a guy who can come in and actually just, maybe not be jaded by the institution of Capitol Hill, but a guy who comes in from the outside and has really simple insights into looking at complex problems and getting people inside the Beltway to realize themselves that they've got some serious conditioning that they have to overcome. Barack Obama presents himself well, articulate, self-deprecating, dresses appropriately for the events that he shows up at. How many people think that he's being propped up to be the candidate for 2008 but will step back in deference to Hillary Clinton, because if he's perceived to be the headliner and he decides to say, no, Hillary's the headliner, he's merely the warm-up act, what kind of a ticket would it be with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama? I think that would be a pretty good ticket for the Democrats. 800-876-4123 is the number. The one thing that we're all going to have to get past, and the conversations about 08 are all too many, whether it's going to be Mitt Romney or it's going to be Giuliani, McCain, the list goes on, Vilsack, everyone coming forward to talk about how they all want to be president. The one thing that everyone is going to have to do, regardless of Republican or Democrat, is distance themselves from the war, from the situation in Iraq. And we know with the survey study group coming out on Wednesday that we're starting to see people reposition themselves. Interesting piece by George Will over the weekend, American Influence Waning in Iraq. And he talks about John McCain was seething. And here's the situation that he put forward. He said John McCain had just met with the proud father of a Marine who was in Iraq. Recently, McCain has heard that his son's legs had been blown off at the hips. McCain said intensely several times with a clenched jaw, he said that this is just unacceptable. 15 minutes later, he went on ABC's This Week, and he brought, according to Will, this steely clarity to the Iraq debate. Now, for 3 years, he's been saying correctly that there are far too few U.S. troops in Iraq. For months, he said we cannot win without many more troops. And Will says that's correct. Let's look at This Week, Stephanopoulos, with John McCain. This from the week of the 19th, November 19th. Now, this is a guy, John McCain, who's been ahead of the curve on this. And they talk about the moral standards or the immoral actions of keeping soldiers in harm's way if we're not going to have clarity in what we're doing. Listen to John McCain in clip 1.
President Bush has said he doesn't want to send more troops now. So by your own standards, isn't it currently immoral to keep Marines and soldiers, other service people in Iraq?
Yes, it is. And you've got to ask yourself some questions. One, are we winning? And I think the answer is no. The other is, what are the consequences of defeat? I just pointed out a widening war, greater chaos in the region, other countries drawn in, emboldening and strengthening of Iraq.
So he says, yeah, it's immoral to keep soldiers in harm's way. This is the stuff that I've been talking to you about with Colonel Hunt on the program and others, Ralph Peters coming forward and saying, look, if we're not going to do what we're supposed to do, fight and win, then what's the point? And I don't think it's going to be a helicopter shot like Saigon. I think the last photo we're going to see is, unfortunately, of a soldier being brought home in a coffin. Someone that's going to be pictured being wheeled into Walter Reed Hospital. I think that's the modern-day image of the Vietnam image that we're still carrying forward. Back in the days of Vietnam, when you had helicopters that were buzzing over the battlefield 100 feet, and you had command and control officers that were giving orders from those very same places. Now what we've done is we've gone to drones and satellites where you've got commanders who were the colonels back then in Vietnam. Now the generals making decisions from Tampa, Florida, and from the Pentagon. So removed from the war, it's easier in a certain way to carry through those same actions that were in Vietnam. But John McCain says, no. When you look at this immoral policy, McCain says, okay, but yeah, even though it is immoral to keep soldiers there, there's something else that's very important to this. And what is the outcome if we pull out? Listen to clip 2.
At what point do you say, I am not going to be complicit with an immoral policy?
And I think we've exhausted every possibility to do what is necessary to succeed, and not till then, because the consequences of failure are catastrophic. We left Vietnam, it was over, we just had to heal the wounds of war. We leave this place, chaos in the region, and they'll follow us home. So there's a great deal more at stake here in this conflict, in my view, a lot more.
And he talks about bringing the troops home. If they're not going to increase the troops, he's asked, will we then advocate to bring the troops home? Listen to John McCain in clip 3.
If those reviews do not call for an increase in troops, as you've advocated, will you call for American troops to come home?
I will, if at the point I think that we have exhausted every option and that we are doomed to failure.
So he says if we've exhausted every option. Well, we have, because they've decided. And as we've talked about it on the program, the fix is in, because now we've got a new mantra out there. There's a new buzzwords out there. There's an article in the Los Angeles Times. We've got an interview Stephen Hadley did, National Security Advisor, over the weekend on Meet the Press, talking about the new buzzwords. Listen to the dings.
is an approach going forward, where we were heading and our approach and the way forward on Iraq, to sort of try to set out the way forward. Obviously, what we need is an approach going forward. I think the American people understand the cost of failure. What they want to see is a way forward that has a prospect of success. He wants to hear what the Iraqi government thinks is the way forward. He's going to then take all of those things and come together with a way forward. His hope is that it's a way forward that the American people can support. Because Iraqis want Iraqis to be responsible for security and chart the way forward.
The way forward is the new buzzword out there. It sounds a little like Celine Dion's show over at Caesars, A New Day. Well, this is the new buzzword. It's called the new way forward. That's on the horizon. They say Bush is set to chart a new changed course. The new way forward is the new buzzword. Just as they say in government today, you're not hungry, you're food insecure. The way forward is politically. What we see people doing now is posturing themselves for their political futures, for their election cycles, and people wanting to be the president and wanting to get reelected to the Senate. This new way forward is nothing other than doublespeak. President Bush, so good at it. Listen to clip 34.
We're going to stay in Iraq to get the job done, so long as the government wants us there.
I'm not going to allow the sacrifice of 2,527 troops who've died in Iraq to be in vain by pulling out before the job is done.
So long as the government wants us there.
An early withdrawal would be a defeat for the United States of America.
So long as the government...
An early withdrawal would embolden the terrorists.
Wants us there.
An early withdrawal would embolden Al-Qaeda and bin Laden.
So long as the government wants us there.
We will stay the course.
So long as the government wants us there.
We will stay the course.
So long as the government...
Complete the job in Iraq.
Wants us there.
We will stay the course until the
government wants us there.
We must stay the course.
Well, listen, we've never been stay the course. So long as the government wants us there.
Because the end result is in our nation's interest. Stay the course.
So long as the
Iraqi people
wants us there.
There will be no early withdrawal so long as we run the Congress.
So long as the government wants us there.
And occupy the White House.
So long as the government wants us there.
So long as the government wants us there. The new way forward. Here's what I see coming down the road for Democrats and Republicans alike, but I think more so for Republicans. The anti-war crowd is a given. They hate President Bush. They've hated him before the war. They've hated him before he was born. They've hated everything about him. The anti-war crowd, the Kucinich followers of the world, they're out there saying, see, I told you so. They've already been taken care of. Their minds have been made up for a long time. Their minds were made up that we were going to lose this even before we started this. So the anti-war crowd is one thing. Who do you think that the government is going to have to be accountable to? Is it people like me that have been long supporting of the war, that said we can win this war? Because what's happening now at this point is that I think people out there who have been understanding that wars are messy, they're not easy, people do die, problems do arise, there are equipment problems, there are staging problems, there are facility problems, there's all that. We understand that. That's a given. But when you look now at this lie, these new slogans, this new way forward, I think that what we're seeing now is politicians are going to have to really try and explain to people like me and others out there who have supported the war effort, who have said we can win this, unwaveringly said we can win this. We still have soldiers over there trying to win this, but what they're trying to do is win the war of the words back here in this country. And I think the ramifications of that are going to come down hard on these elected officials who think that they can spin us with words like you're not hungry, you're food insecure. When you look at who now is starting to really look at the lies and deception coming from both sides of the political aisle, coming from the White House, coming from the Pentagon, and coming from the handlers, people out there are getting hip to the fact that when this election rolls around in 2008, we will not forget. We will not go gently into that political night. Give me a call on this conversation at 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, join me.
The Jerry Doyle Show.
Think for yourself. Question authority.
Speak your mind now on The Jerry Doyle Show.
Obviously, what we need is an approach going forward, where we were heading and our approach and the way forward on Iraq, to sort of try to set out the way forward. Obviously, what we need is an approach going forward. I think the American people understand the cost of failure. What they want to see is a way forward.
And now, 30 seconds of Jerry Doyle.
yeah, I agree, borders should be closed. But the fact that we've allowed them to come and the fact that they are crowding the emergency rooms and using them as their primary health care drives up costs all across the board. And I'd be willing to bet that this $2,500 CAT scan and this $3,000 angiogram, all of this, they factored in. They looked at that and they said, wow, he's got really good insurance. We're going to biopsy his wallet because we have other people that have been getting those same services that haven't been paying for them.
Show.
President Bush has said he doesn't want to send more troops now. So by your own standards, isn't it currently immoral to keep Marines and soldiers, other service people in Iraq?
Yes, it is.
John McCain talking with George Stephanopoulos on This Week saying, yeah, it's immoral to keep soldiers there. Let me ask you this very simple question. Do you think that the short attention span of the typical reader, viewer, caller to a talk show is going to work this time? Do you think that people will forget of this transition to these new buzzwords like new way forward and until the government wants us to leave, the new strategies from not stay the course to, well, there's some new challenges in front of us. Do you think people are going to put this all in the rearview mirror when it comes time for people to really start positioning themselves for the 08 election cycle? 800-876-4123 is the number. Las Vegas, Nevada, Naomi, KDON, line 10. Naomi, you're on the program.
Yeah, I just have to disagree. I think during that press conference with Maliki, that's the only time that you saw President Bush say that. And I think the reason he said it, or what I got out of it, was that Maliki was standing there, and he didn't want him to look like a puppet, like the government there had some kind of control in that. I don't think it was a buzzword. I really don't.
All right, Nam, let me read you this one quote here from Stephen Hadley. He was at a meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Zalmay Khalilzad, and he said, Bush's actions show him a bold leadership step, not a reaction to calls for a change in strategy by the Iraq Study Group. So they're saying that what Bush is doing right now is bold leadership. Do you buy that?
I don't think he's got some bold leadership going on right now, not like he used to. But for that one specific press conference, I think all he was doing was trying to not make Maliki look like a puppet, which
right, and also because of the Hadley memo that was leaked right before Bush went over there, and whoever leaked that should be found. So much information is being leaked day after day that by the time this Iraq Study Group comes out on Wednesday, it's going to be, oh, really? I've already got the cliff notes. Unfortunately, I see this ending very badly, Naomi. I see us with soldiers still at the other end of a rifle, with snipers taking shots at them and IEDs going off, and there's something else happening back here. And John McCain says it's immoral to keep soldiers there. So if it's immoral to keep soldiers there, and he says until we know that we've done everything and exhausted every possibility, is there any possibility at this point that anybody has any intention of having us win over there? If the answer, in my opinion, is no, then what's the point of keeping them there? 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, join me.
Stand up and be heard now on The Jerry Doyle Show. And now, 60 seconds of Jerry Doyle.
If heterosexuals had marriage figured out, I might say don't mess with it. So you've got one side saying absolutely not, and you got the other side saying I want it now. Both sides are being selfish instead of looking at it rationally and saying I'm not sure if it's a threat, I'm not sure if it's a problem, I'm not exactly sure what it is. Where do you draw the lines on morality? Can you separate the agenda callers who want to say AIDS, abortion, promiscuity, gay marriage, slippery slope? Who are the perfect people out there that can say I'm living the great just life? If I had told you all of these things about this Army sergeant and not the fact that he was gay, you would say he's a hero. Why wouldn't he be allowed to go back and serve his country? Why wouldn't he be allowed to stay in the Army? Just as if you found out that I was gay, would that change your perception of me as a talk show host? By the way, I'm not. I'll be talking that down for the next 30 years. I could think of worse things that I could be than gay. Did the pin of reality just burst the balloon of perception? Charles was telling me that even though I might be right about the fix being in and that all of these people now are trying to position themselves in this new way forward, the new way forward is political. It's not militarily. When we've had the Iraq study group with a bunch of senior citizens, nothing against senior citizens, but the youngest in the group is 64. You've got a lobbyist and a former member of the Supreme Court, no military advisors. Why? Because they don't want a military outcome. Charles says, well, okay, we've got a mess over in Iraq. We've got a mess in Afghanistan. So what do we do about it? Do we just walk away and not protect American assets and interest abroad? Yeah, pretty much. That's my opinion. But then we have all of those little connections. We have all of those moneyed interest friends-o Bush. We have all of those contractors, all those billions of dollars to be given away. We have to protect our relationships with Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they're one of the biggest soft sponsors of international terrorism. We have to have Dick Cheney fly over there and have a private meeting before Bush flies over to meet with Maliki. What was Dick Cheney doing in Saudi Arabia? Checking on the expansion of the Polo League over there? Was he going on a little hunting trip? What was Dick Cheney doing in Saudi Arabia? Business, right? So I'm not altruistic in understanding the fact that, you know, we are just an island unto ourselves. But this, if not for money and moneyed connections and rich people getting richer, then why are we there another day? I need someone to give me an explanation as to why we're going to stay there another day, why we're going to have one more dead soldier, why we're going to have one more soldier come back without an arm or a leg or both. Why? Are U.S. moneyed interests that important? Is this about finding some way to make sure we keep the little Dubai World Ports deal? Remember that one? 6 months ago was the timetable to sell off the ports because we were concerned about American security. How come that deal hasn't been done now that it's 2.5 months after the due date? Why is that deal not done? Am I supposed to look the other way on that one and say, well, Jerry, you have to understand it's about relationships, and we don't want to, upset the balance of power, and we wouldn't want to certainly walk on any kind of a deal here that would hurt us economically long term. We wouldn't want to have to look at Paulson over there in China doing deals with China where we say, hey, human rights violations, who gives a crap about that? We can get more Chinese goods. We can get more U.S. companies buying Chinese banks so that they can get forays into the Chinese market. Oh, another billion people that we can get a checking account from. Now, I understand business is business. Internationalism does work to a certain degree. But why are we in Iraq, other than the fact that we're trying to prop up U.S. business interests? Why? Why would we be there? 800-876-4123 is the number. Let's go to Virginia. Cliff, WTNT. Cliff, you're on the program.
Yes, Jerry, thank you for asking the right questions and asking many of them. And I hope that some of these people will answer you. I'm a former airborne infantry officer. And it just seems to me that we don't have executive leadership now. Just imagine George Washington after Valley Forge saying, well, we'll have a study group to see whether we should continue or not.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the only thing that I see this pointing to, Cliff, is this administration and politicians on both sides of the aisle are trying to find a way to buy time so that everyone understands that all of the accounting work is done with regard to the relationships that corporations have internationally to make sure that oil is flowing, to make sure that goods are coming in containers, to make sure that all of the business interests that have been propping up this and previous administrations with their political donations and their cronyisms, that those relationships are still intact. That's the only conclusion I can come to at this point. Thanks, Cliff. 800-876-4123 is the number. All right, here's another one. We talk about the Dubai Ports deal. They say, yeah, don't worry. We got bids coming in. There's going to be a bid that is going to be coming in that is somehow going to get controlling interest back in the hands of the people that already had it. It'll be done through a shell corporation, a series of shell corporations. It will be done in a way that it looks like what the American people wanted done got done. But what got done is that they got it to a place where they could get it to the guys that they wanted to have it. That's how it works in this country. That's capitalism at its finest. If we can figure out a way that we can do this three-card Monte with the American people and make it look like they've actually changed ownership hands on the ports in America, then people go, see? But how many people even remembered how contentious the debate was over the Dubai World Ports deal? And that after all of the rancor and the phone calls and the blast faxes and the emails and the protest, they were said, yep, done. And American people went, whoo, man, we got that one done, didn't we? We showed them. We had Congressman King on, and he said the American people spoke to Congress. Congress listened. Congress reacted. Congress put their hand up and said, stop. Stop doing what you're doing, Dubai World Ports deal. And we all pounded our chest and patted each other on the back and said, job well done. And you know what they do? They understand the political cycles. They understand the news cycles. They understand how things work, because people's attentions will be diverted to yet another missing teen in Aruba, or an overboard groom, or there'll be a war on Christmas, or someone will have stolen the menorah from out in front of a church, and then people will be talking about crosses on Mount Soledad and battleships in San Francisco. And they know that when the American people's attentions get diverted to another area, that they can work behind the scenes. They're like cockroaches. When it's dark, they come out of their hiding places and they do their dirty work. And when the light of reality gets shone upon them, then they go back to their familiar hiding grounds. The problem is the light of reality has gone off on Dubai World Ports. The light of look at the borders. Come on, this is the poll question at jerrydoyle.com. Do you believe that the 700-mile fence along the U.S.-Mexican border will ever be built? 83% of you say no. 17% say yes. The answer is no. It's not going to be built. And here's what we need to do, guys, is we need to get a letter sent off to the President of the United States and say, seeing as how you had that nice signing ceremony there in Arizona where you appropriated $1.2 billion, although you didn't fund $950 million of it. You know, the fence that was supposed to be built, which isn't going to be built. But what did Bush say back then? He said that before we secure the borders, what do we have to do? Anybody remember? We have to modernize the borders before we secure the borders. And how does President Bush figure out we're going to modernize the borders? Well, he decided to give $2.5 billion taxpayer dollars to Boeing. Do you remember this? To develop new technologies that are going to help create a virtual fence on the U.S.-Mexico border. So now, here's what happens. The Americans look at this signing ceremony, and they go, oh, man, see, President Bush is listening to what the American people wanted. Just like Dubai World Ports, 1 for 1. Now the border's being secure, 2 for 2. We want a fence, 3 for 3. They got the signing there, 4 for 4, $1.2 billion. Sounds good, 5 for 5. With stats like this, they should be in the Political Hall of Fame. But here's what happens. Now we turn around and we look at this story here out of the Washington Times. Now they're saying, well, wait a minute. Congress is going to pass amnesty for what they estimate to be now 20 million people in this country. They say Democrats have been unified behind the principle that illegals currently in the country should get citizenship rights. Years of dawdling have worsened our border security and made it harder to fix this broken system, says Patrick Leahy, the Vermont Democrat, who is going to head up Judiciary next year. He said we should not let partisan politics and intolerance continue to delay and derail effective reform. He says this past May, quote, the Senate passed bipartisan versions of comprehensive immigration reform to bring people out of the shadows while strengthening our borders. He said, I look forward to building on that work next year and making progress on a bipartisan effort that improves security, supports our economy, and respects the dignity of all people. Well, how about the dignity of citizen taxpayers? How about respecting our dignity, people that are here legally, that are paying taxes into the system? They say here, the Senate bill, amnesty. Why? Because President Bush is an ally in the White House. Democrats are going to proceed to ultimately make citizens out of most of the illegals now in the country, and Republicans still reeling from deep losses in the November elections will give up the fight. There is never going to be a fence built. There is never going to be a virtual wall or a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. Advocacy groups out there think that the Senate bill is too harsh on illegals because it imposes fines on all, and it's too harsh because it excludes others with criminal records. We wouldn't want to do that, would we? We wouldn't want to exclude people from coming into this country because they're criminals, even though they're here illegally, and that makes a criminal of them in the first place. You see, because they broke the first rule. They broke the first rule by coming here illegally, but apparently that's just no big deal in America anymore. Just don't worry about the laws. You see, even Bush says we're a nation of laws, even though he just decides to look the other way when it comes to what the real laws are. So now the 700-mile fence along the border not going to be built. Originally, they were looking at a 28-mile stretch that they were going to study for 18 months. They said that they would have this in place within 18 months. Homeland Security head Michael Chertoff says, looks like 3 to 5 years. Not going to happen. 3 to 5 years. Politics, it's like dog years. That's like 80 years, 90 years down the road. That's how long they would expect people's time span to remember what they actually said. So if we're going to have amnesty for 20 million, which means it's probably more like 30 million, if there's not going to be a fence, then why does Boeing get to keep the $2.5 billion that Bush and company decided to give taxpayer dollars to develop new technologies for the virtual fence that will never be built? That's stealing. That's a crime. He took $2.5 billion that he could have put towards his ill-managed war for a week worth of expenditures at $8 billion a month. Maybe we should ask him for the money back so he can direct more money so that more of his friends can make more money on the backs of dead soldiers. 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, join me.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Join the conversation now on The Jerry Doyle Show. And now, 30 seconds of Jerry Doyle.
I have a solid belief that moderate middle America wants to be heard. And it's not Democrat or Republican. It's not left or right. It's not rich or poor. It's not black or white. It's not on any of the fringes. And again, I get back to the 80-20 rule. 10% on the left and 10% on the right exploit 80% of the moderate middle. And how does the 80% take control of the 80% and in some way relegate that 20% to the sidelines as best as possibly can happen?
Jerry Doyle Show.
You know, I'm looking here at little things that I just find as highly inconsistent in what we're seeing from this government. As you all know, or as many are aware, that the government has been tracking everybody entering or leaving the United States by air, sea, or land, assessed a ATS analyst score, basically kind of like your credit score. Information is where you are from, how the ticket was paid, your motor vehicle records, past one-way travel, seating preferences, the kind of meal that you ordered on a plane, etc. Okay. And they say that that information is vital to the security of the nation. Okay, I can go along with that. Travelers, though, are not allowed to see or directly challenge these risk assessments, which the government intends to keep on file for 40 years. And you say, all right, so far I'm kind of okay if it's about keeping us safe, it's about keeping planes in the sky, if it's about keeping terrorists off the planes, I can go with that. Courts, private contractors can obtain some of the data under certain circumstances. This information is going to be shared with state, local, and foreign governments for use in hiring, contracting, and licensing decisions. And you say, okay, I can kind of go along with that. It's really about national security. If it's about keeping people from blowing planes up, I'm good with that. But if they can share that information with citizens in this country, about citizens in this country, then why can't the Social Security Administration share information with governmental agencies and law enforcement to tell us where the illegals are? Why won't they share that information? Why won't they keep that information on file for 40 years? I don't mind if you're looking at me. I don't mind if you're peeking through my stuff. I don't mind if you know that on a short flight on a small plane, I want an aisle seat. I don't mind if you know that on a long flight on a big plane, I want a window seat. Don't ever put me in the middle. But I also understand that there are 20 million illegals estimated in this country, and we know where they are. We know who they are. Their Social Security number mismatches to the tune of 8 million a year are known. But yet this government won't share that information with agencies that could do something about it. So while we're playing by the rules and saying, all right, I understand, I got to give away a certain amount of freedoms or maybe a little bit of personal information, I'm cool with that. But yet the very same information that's available that could do something about the illegal alien problem in this country, they don't want to share that information. And if you suggest sharing that information, if you suggest identifying who the employers are and who the illegals are, then you're some type of racist. You're some type of isolationist. You know, you just don't understand what the system's all about. I do understand what the system's all about. It's people that are speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Bush says, I got to protect the American people, then do something about the illegals in this country. You want to protect the country from terrorists? Then secure the border. Don't give Boeing $2.5 billion of taxpayer money and blow smoke up my ass and tell me that they're doing R&D to develop new technologies to keep me safer. We can do a lot more to keep all of us safer if they had the guts to do it. 800-876-4123 is the number. Maryland, WTNT, Francis, line 1. Francis, you're on the program.
Hi, Jerry. How you doing?
I'm all right.
Jerry, I got to disagree with you. I respect what you just said, but I think the government is totally incapable of finding any of these people. I just can't believe that they're capable of doing it.
Well, the laws, Francis, are on the books. It is illegal to hire an illegal alien. It's illegal to hire someone without proper documentation. It's illegal to put them on the payroll. It's illegal to have them a part of the system. If we find employers, the illegals will self-migrate back to wherever they came from because there won't be a job for them here. And just as people gain weight over time, you don't just wake up one day and go, whoa, where'd that 40 pounds come from? It comes a little bit at a time, and it leaves a little bit at a time. And such as we've seen in the amnesty of 1986, now 20 years later, we understand that amnesty didn't work in 1986. Why? Because we didn't put in place controls that would control people coming into this country. And if we're not going to have a wall on the border, if we're not going to do something about security between U.S. and Mexico, the only way to do it is to use the databases of information to have the mismatched numbers go to the employers and say, should these people be hired? No. Why? Because we can't verify the Social Security number. And if you can't verify the Social Security number, you give them 2 weeks to do it. And if they still can't verify it and they still have that employee on the payroll, then you fine them. And when you start to hammer employers for big dollars, it will get their attention very quick. And there's a company that can verify employee information to the tune upwards of 52 cents per person. 52 cents you can spend to guarantee that that person that you have working for you is allowed to be on your payroll. Yet this government looks the other way. But when it comes to you and I and everybody else that freely gives of our information, the government uses that information to assign you some kind of FICA score and says, you can't even look at it. You don't have any right to look at your own terror assessment threat list number that they provide to you. You can't look at it. It's not yours to see. But yet we see that people are here illegally, yet the government does nothing. Thanks, Francis. 800-876-4123 is the number. Jeff, San Jose, California, KNEW Line 5. Jeff, you're on the program.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Jerry. It'd be a simple way to find illegal aliens in this country. I live in San Jose, California. You show up at Home Depot, you can find more than 5,000 every single day in the Bay Area in one city. It's unbelievable to think that we live like this and that we follow the rules and everyone else just goes their own merry way. No taxes, no nothing, collect welfare. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, Mitt Romney now is in the state of Massachusetts, governor there, who they say is a presidential candidate potentially in 2008. He's trying to get the state troopers in Massachusetts to be allowed to arrest immigrants who are in the state illegally. Right now, the troopers have no power, but they're working with federal authorities to get a deal in place so that federal officers will be able, and troopers will be able to have the power to arrest illegals. They're going to go through a month-long training program. It's, of course, being criticized by immigration rights groups because it concerns racial profiling. Well, I'm sorry. If you've still got, that many people in one area, it's not hard to come to the conclusion that there's perhaps one or two that might not be in the country legally. But we don't have the guts. Look, we don't have the guts to do anything anymore in this country. We don't have the guts to fight and win a war. We don't have the guts to kill bad guys and blow stuff up. We don't have the guts to crack down on illegals. We don't have the guts to go after big corporate moneyed interest in this country with the Dubai World Ports deal. We don't have the guts to do anything because the gutless wonders in Washington, D.C. have figured out that it doesn't matter what we do, say, or talk about. They're going to do what they do and want to do in their own best interest, and the average citizen in this country be damned. That's the way they look at things, because it's all about them. It's about their power sharing, and their money grabbing. That's what this supposed government is all about, this lack of representative government that we have. Thanks, Jeff. 800-876-4123 is the number. All right, do you hate George Bush? Call me and tell me why. 800-876-4123. Do you hate George Bush? Maybe you don't. I can show you why you might not. You may disagree with him. You may be disgusted by him. But you probably don't hate him. If you do, give me a call at 800-876-4123, and we'll see if we can figure this out on the other side. Jerry Doyle, join me.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Visit us online at talkradionetwork.com.
We're going to stay in Iraq so long as the government wants us there.
Did you inhale?
That was the point.
We have to draw a definition as what is off-color, what is blue, and what is out-and-out dirty.
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Jerry Doyle grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Has a 10-year career on Wall Street. A long list of movie and TV roles, including the character Michael Garibaldi for 110 episodes on the Emmy Award-winning sci-fi series Babylon 5. He's an honorary naval aviator and F-16 test pilot.
If I break it, they can take it out of my pay.
He ran as a Republican for the U.S. House of Representatives in California.
Either I'm dead right or I'm crazy.
You want to talk politics, pop culture, and current events?
Oh, yes. I need the distraction.
Let's do it on the Jerry Doyle Show.
Well, let's do it on the Jerry Doyle Show, shall we? JD here. Hope you had a great weekend. 800-876-4123 is the number. Danson, Charles, and Jesse working the booth. D-Squared's got your calls at 800-876-4123. Emails at the website, jerrydoyle.com. Poll question up there. Do you believe that the 700-mile fence along the U.S.-Mexican border will ever be built? Right now, 81% no, 19% yay. Yay to the calls at 800-876-4123. This idea of hating President Bush. Now, having been in Hollywood for 12 years and going through the hate fest that existed there, it's almost as if the hatred of President Bush is something that's like hip to be involved in. So I'm going to throw it out there to you. Do you hate President Bush, and why? 800-876-4123. Am I disgusted with President Bush? Yeah. When it comes to his capitulation on this war, when it comes to his lack of integrity to the U.S.-Mexican border, when it comes to his lack of fiscal discipline, and the list can go on. Do I hate the nonsense in politics? Yeah. But is it really hate? But people out there, whenever you listen to, unfortunately, too many people that have the bully pulpit, they say they hate President Bush. Screen Actors Guild Board of Directors meeting. Jane Kesmerick comes through the door. First thing she says, oh, I hate President Bush. Hate President Bush. I hate these blank, blank Republicans. And in Hollywood, there's big hate going on. Roseanne Barr, Real Time with Bill Maher. She was talking about, how people had to come together. The next night, she does a special on HBO, Clip 32. She has a couple of things to say about President Bush.
Bush blows. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing. I love it that people agree. It's so good that people agree now because they didn't always agree. But yeah, he blows. I hate Bush. I hate the president. I hate the president. I hate the president. I hate the president.
She hates the president. Or does she really? Do you hate President Bush? If so, why? 800-876-4123 is the number. Bette Midler, not a big fan of President Bush. She's from the Big Apple to the Big Easy. There was a fundraising concert in New York City. She was talking about not just her hatred of President Bush, but also of Republicans. Listen to clip 28.
Terrible thing happened to me. Today I got a letter from the Republican Party thanking me for supporting this administration's policies. I did what any self-respecting American of integrity and class would do. I wrote, go yourself.
Apparently not a big fan of the Republican Party, hates the Republican Party, and doesn't have some kind of things to say about President Bush, although apparently he's a big fan of hers. Listen to clip 29.
Just between us, I would never actually pick on George Bush because, he's a big fan of mine. He came to see me in the 70s. Came to a show of mine in the 70s. A coke dealer of his got him some tickets and...
So obviously we know Hollywood does not have a love affair with President Bush or with the Republicans for that matter. But when I hear people talk about how they hate President Bush, is it really individual hatred that comes from a reasoned place. Let's take a look at the definition of hate. To dislike intensely or passionately is one of the definitions that they have there. I don't think that that is accurate. I think you can dislike someone intensely. I think you can feel passionately against their programs. It says here, feel extreme aversion or extreme hostility toward, to detest. They say to use it as to hate the enemy or to hate bigotry. But when people talk about hating Bush, why do they hate President Bush? It would be interesting to see people give specific examples of where the hatred comes from. Now, we know Cindy Sheehan hates President Bush. She says it's because she lost her son Casey in this immoral war that President Bush decided to take us into. But there's a fine line between hatred and, in my opinion, disgust. I'm disgusted with the promises made by this guy. I'm disgusted in myself, actually, for helping him to get elected in 2000, a maxed-out contributor to his campaign, a maxed-out contributor to the GLAC, the General Election Legal Fund that he put together. I'm not happy with myself for buying into this nonsense that was sold to the American people in 2004, which is the reason I left the Republican Party in April of 2005 on the air. I don't hate the Republican Party. I'm disgusted by the direction that they've gone in. I don't hate Democrats. I just wish they were more forceful in standing up to be a force to push back against Republicans. But when people say they hate President Bush, do you? And if so, why? 800-876-4123 is the number. Let's go to Washington, D.C. Alan, WTNT. Alan, line 2, you're on the program.
Yes, I hate President Bush. Absolutely, I hate him. I think that this man has done more to ruin the integrity of the United States around the world than any other single individual in the current 50 to 100 years of this country. I hate the fact that he has been completely disingenuous in everything he said about being the great uniter and the compassionate conservative. I hate the fact that he has taken the people of Louisiana and left them to fend for themselves. I hate the fact that he has taken anybody who disagreed with him and put them off in a course where they were to be considered traitors to the country. And I could go on for another 20 minutes. But the hate is real, the passion is there, and I don't just dislike him, I hate him.
But let me ask you, Alan, is it the combination of things that you mentioned that brought that hate to the forefront, or did you have a certain predisposition to him, to Bush 41, to the Republican Party in general?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I have no problem voting across party lines. I will be honest and forthright and say that I never bought into him from the beginning, and I never bought into the war from the beginning. And part of the reason I feel so strongly about it is because I was chastised for being right. I was chastised as an individual every time I tried to mention that I didn't believe in this war, that I didn't believe that this man was competent to lead us to war, that I didn't believe in the whole concept of imposing a democracy on a country that doesn't know anything about it. I was considered and treated as if I was a communist, and I turned out to be right. And absolutely, it has nothing to do with the Republican Party. It has nothing to do with anything around it. It has to do with him as an individual and the fact that he has been dishonest since day one, and also because I just don't think the man's very bright.
Well, I don't think that he was certainly the best choice that we could have had a choice to vote for. Neither do I think John Kerry was the best choice that we could have had a choice to vote for. I think the political parties get together and decide who would be the best puppet at the end of the strings that are being managed by the puppeteers of either political party. I don't think he's an evil person, Bush. I don't think he's, by nature, wanting to see things go horribly wrong. I just think he's just either surrounded himself with people that won't give him the right advice, or if they do, he chooses to not take that very same advice. But there's a flow to the mentality of the hate crowd for Bush. Now, you individually, Alan, may be a guy that has come to this place on your own, but there's a psychohistorian by the name of Lloyd DeMar who talks about this groupthink, about how large groups of people are almost always driven more by fantasy than reality. Nations and groups have different, what he calls group fantasies, which are designed not to negotiate with reality, but to contain fears and anxieties. And maybe the fears and anxieties that you and others have about the war are manifesting themselves in the person of President Bush. Because if Bush is not a very bright guy, how did he manage to trick 100 senators and 435 House members? How did he pull that off?
Look, the reality is I was no great fan of Ronald Reagan's either, but I have total respect for the man. I had total respect for the fact that he was elected by the population and that he was my president, like it or not. This man has done nothing but ruin the integrity of the United States around the world. And the amazing thing to me about all this was that so many people supported him from day one. This was a guy that I do not want people running my government from a religious base. Okay, that's another reason why I hate him. We're supposed to be a secular government. If you want to be a Christian, be a Christian. If you want to be a Muslim, be a Muslim. But don't put it on the rest of the country that that's the way they're supposed to live, and that's the way the government is supposed to be run. His getting involved.
So if you want God, and I think religion has to be protected from politics, not the other way around. But so you would be equally as offended by the Democrats this weekend in the response to President Bush's radio talk to have a man of faith deliver that message. Reverend Jim Wallace this week was talking about speaking not for the Democrat Party, he said, but as a person of faith who feels the hunger in America for a new vision of our life together and sees the opportunity to apply our best moral values. Harry Reid said, the Democrat minority leader, soon-to-be majority leader from Nevada, said he chose Wallace to give the address in the spirit of bipartisanship. So you would say that if the Republicans are using religion, then equally the Democrats would be guilty of using religion also.
Absolutely, but all I'm trying to point out is this is not a single event. You see, I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to say that everybody's following kick the president kind of think because now it's in vogue to do it. And I don't disagree with you. I think there are a lot of people that I am very unhappy with that it took them this long to catch on. But the fact of the matter is that this is a gentleman who has taken it upon himself to do more to divide this country. And I will say this on a negative point of view for in terms of Republicans. The fact of the matter is you had the same kind of vehement dislike, I don't know, call it hatred, call it dislike, when Clinton was in the White House. Every time Clinton spoke, my friends who are really extreme right-wing Republicans couldn't listen to him. They couldn't react any way but to say they hated this guy, that he had no integrity, that he had no class, that what he did with Monica Lewinsky was disgusting, and it made them hate him. And I think it swings both ways, but I don't think it's any one particular instance. It's the culmination of all of these things put on top of each other, and yet you've still got 20 or 30% of the population out there who support this guy. What does it take for people to see the light and understand that he's a dimwit who has taken advice from people who had no skin in the game? Their kids aren't over there fighting. Their kids don't live in Louisiana. I mean, this man is disgusting, and I hate
What about okay, Alan, I appreciate your comments. What about Jimmy Carter, 1979, 56 hostages, 444 days, does nothing? Is it possible that what we're seeing in our international policy, in our corporate takeover of the political process, in the lobby dollars influencing outcomes of how people want things to actually work out as opposed to how they should be done, is it possible that what we saw in the midterm elections is a reflection of all of the frustrations and all of the hatred, and it all happens to be directed at President Bush? Because the love affair with President Bush after September 11, 2001 was about as equal to the hatred that's out there for President Bush now. I'll explain that to you when we return, and your phone calls. Do you hate Bush, and why? Or is it just hip to hate? 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, join me.
And I get sick when I'm around. I can't stand to be around. I hate everything about you.
Yes, I hate President Bush. Absolutely.
Everybody loves you, and so do I.
Jerry Doyle Show.
The president! I hate the president! I hate the president!
Join the conversation now on The Jerry Doyle Show.
Don't mess with Texas.
And now, 30 seconds of Jerry Doyle.
We don't have cameras in a lot of courtroom cases. We sequester juries. How come we don't sequester Congress and say, until you set out a budget, then you can't leave? Oh, man, am I sick and tired. Absolutely ridiculous. 1947, televised congressional proceedings when congressmen who should have been there part-time for free became rock stars. Washington, Hollywood for ugly people.
George Bush, right in person. I can't believe I'm standing right next to you.
I appreciate it. As President of the United States, just let me say I love New Orleans. I love the people in New Orleans. And I know that the people in New Orleans love me too.
Brady and a Bush impersonator for a fundraising effort on behalf of Hurricane Katrina. Apparently alienating a lot of the people that might have given money. Someone who doesn't have a fondness for this country. This in the news, U.S. actress Gwyneth Paltrow prefers British dinner talk. She says she's far more interested in her adopted homeland of Britain than back in her native country. She says, I love the English lifestyle. It's not as capitalistic as America, although I do believe she has a perfume line out called, what is that stinky stuff? Pleasures. Yes, so while she takes pleasure in having Americans buy her perfume, she doesn't have much to say about the country. She said, I love the English lifestyle, not as capitalistic. People don't talk about work and money. They talk about interesting things at dinner. She said, I like living here because I don't fit into the bad side of American psychology. The British are much more intelligent and civilized than the Americans. I'm sure people are running to the stores now to buy her perfume. I guess the stimulating conversation that they have in Britain must be conversations about how Sharia law is taking over the law of the land there. How British policies aid Muslim extremists. They're still upset about that little 1776 thing and that little 1812 bonfire. Hates the country. Dislike would be probably a better word, but she likes the American dollars. 800-876-4123 is the number. Talking about the hatred of President Bush, I dislike him in a lot of areas. I'm disgusted with a lot of his policies. I find it hard to find the hate for the guy. Alan, the caller, just said, look, yeah, I hate him. Right up front, he said, I hate him. Now, he may be very honest in what he's thinking, but if you look at the work of psychohistorian Lloyd DeMaw, he talks about fantasy, group fantasy, and he said fantasy precedes the reality. We look for conditions in external reality to support it, identical to the manner in which a paranoid mind operates. According to DeMaw, the state of the group fantasy is what national opinion polls actually capture. That is, they take a snapshot of what he calls, quote, the mood of the country, which mostly consist of gut feelings that have nothing to do with actual conditions. And he has a couple of points here. He says the fact that the economy is thriving, inconsequential to the significant majority of Americans who fantasize that it is not, and he contrasts it with FDR, who was able to sustain a unifying group fantasy despite economic policies that aggravated and extended the Great Depression. In fact, that is often what makes a great leader, the ability to forge a strong and compelling fantasy for people to believe in. Maybe we can figure out why people think they hate Bush, but maybe in fact they don't. 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, give me a call.
Stand up and be heard now on The Jerry Doyle Show.
Damn the Constitution.
I must have been blind, deaf and dumb. I think it's time for a reaction.
The Jerry Doyle Show.
We're talking about hatred of President Bush. Do you hate President Bush? If you do, why? Or is it possible that you're part of the groupthink that's out there, where it's hip to hate Bush? Our caller, Alan, said, yeah, he hates Bush. He was right up front about it. He said with regard to Ronald Reagan, he said, I wasn't a big fan of him, but, he had a certain degree of respect for Ronald Reagan, that he was the president, even though he disagreed with him politically and he had issues with him. But he said there was something about Ronald Reagan that caused him to respect Ronald Reagan, but not to hate Ronald Reagan. Let me ask you this question. Was Ronald Reagan really that great a leader? Or was his wisdom in capturing the mood of the nation? Think post-Carter, think 1979, think the Iranian hostage crisis, think where America was looking for that new vision. Looking back at Reagan, if we had him today, do you think we'd bring about the fall of the wall? Because the mood of the nation is so much different now? Do you think that we'd actually have that come to fruition today if the will of the people isn't behind it, in the belief of actually wanting to get that done? Think back to what Reagan was all about. And we're talking about this historian, psychologist, psychohistorian we'll call him, DeMaw, where he talks about how people have this groupthink mentality and they look at things as a reflection of the mood of the nation. And he talks here about elections. He says, basically, elections are a national opinion poll. It's not about the election. It's about the opinion of the country. It says the election doesn't necessarily provide much in the way of objective information about objective circumstances, but subjective data about how it, quote, feels to be a part of a historical group at a particular time. He turns the presidential approval ratings completely backwards. He said he doesn't believe that it's actually about measuring approval, but it's more about measuring disapproval, about how effectively or ineffectively a fantasy leader is containing the public's anxiety. And he says here, since the group is largely driven by family, it naturally follows that they will look for a leader who can reassure them about the world and diminish their anxiety. In President Bush trying to move forward on the war, is it that he's not in sync with what the mood of the nation is, and hence people transpose onto him the fact that, no, you don't understand it, you don't get it. And I think he's absorbing a lot of this hatred because of the fact that he happens to be the president at this time, but he's not dovetailing in with what the American people feel in their gut, right or wrong. 800-876-4123 is the number. Las Vegas, Nevada. Cornelius listens to on KDON. He hates President Bush. Cornelius, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much. Calling as a 15-year resident now here of a very, very red state. I believe that hatred is wrong, but in this case I'm willing to make an exception. And it has nothing to do with the fact that George W. Bush spent 2 years of his life at Harvard's Graduate School of Business Administration, acquiring the skill sets necessary to become a masterful micromanager, but everything to do with the way this highly educated individual American treated an American hero on the rice paddies of Vietnam, former United States Senator and Veterans Administration Commissioner Max Cleland of Georgia.
I know Max personally, and I've known Max to be a solid guy, a guy that really stands for positions that he has a deep belief in. And I don't think that there's any place in politics to besmirch someone's service to the country. And I felt the same way about John Kerry when Republicans would call in and say, yeah, but John Kerry only spent 4 months in Vietnam. War is hell. 4 months, 4 hours, 4 minutes, 4 days, 4 years. He was there. And I understand what the Swift boat thing was all about. And when I see the numbers that came forward, that's for them to say they were there, some of them serving directly with him. But for people to come out and say he was only there for 4 months, whatever Kerry's intentions were for going there, whether it was with a camera because he wanted to photograph himself, whether it was to go get 3 Purple Hearts and out and to come back and to position himself like JFK, that's for him to decide. That's what John Kerry has to live with himself every day. But I don't like politically where people go after each other and just say, start to really undermine people's military credibility. I don't think that that's a place that we should all go. Thanks, Cornelius. 800-876-4123 is the number. Steve, West Palm Beach, Florida, WFTL, line 6. Steve, you're on the program.
I wanted to make a comment about when people constantly assert that this worldwide opinion, this anti-Americanism worldwide is solely the result of George Bush. It drives me nuts to hear that. And the reason is I was in Europe like 20 years ago, and let me tell you, man, anti-Americanism was very prevalent at that time. And if you look at the international press throughout the decades, has been very anti-American, and we have our own people like Noam Chomsky and William Bloom writing these very anti-American books that get really high reviews throughout the world. And this has been cooking up for quite some time. In fact, when I was in Germany, there was actually a leftist terrorist organization called the Red Army Faction. You never hear about them anymore. But I was in the military at the time in Germany, and you had to, be really careful and look out for these people. And at times, they had curfews. You had to get in at a certain time because these people were looking to blow us up and stuff like that. And I just don't get it. Are all these people so ignorant? Are they that ignorant about the rest of the world to think that just because of George Bush, the whole world hates us? I don't get it.
Well, you point out Chomsky's book, which was held up by who? Hugo Chavez at the United Nations. And this anti-Americanism has been out there. It has been spreading. George Bush has done some things to obviously irk people in the international community. He's done it here domestically. But this is part of what I'm trying to get to, Steve, is that this hatred, this deep-seated hatred that people have for George Bush is something that is, I think, a culmination of events that we've seen taking place over time. Has he made mistakes in Iraq? Absolutely. We know that. It's a given that the war is woefully mismanaged. People should have been fired a long time ago. Rumsfeld should have been gone in the first 6 months of this war. I mean, the list of things goes on. But when I look at how this hatred manifests itself in pointing toward George Bush, they're eliminating Great Britain and Spain and Italy and France. They're eliminating these movements. They're eliminating the Chavezes and the dictators and the Mugabes and the Howards. They're eliminating all of these people that have had this we hate America international agenda, and somehow now here in this country it's hip to hate. It's almost hip to be in that same club.
Yeah, it is, and I wonder what's the future going to bring us if we don't get a good leader to get us out of this. With the Chavezes getting all their popularity and things like that. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can just hope for a good leader the next time around. I don't know what to say.
Well, I appreciate the call, Steve. There's an interesting piece in the New Yorker about Lou Dobbs. His Lou Dobbs Tonight program on CNN. I mean, they absolutely just shred Lou Dobbs because he talks about things that who is he to talk about all of these issues? Who's he to talk about broken government? Who's he to talk about national insecurity? Who's he to and he goes down these things which are hugely popular with Dobbs's listening audience. He's outraged, he's alarmed, he calls the decisions idiotic, disgusting, sickening. And then they go through this article and say, well, he goes to fancy restaurants. And, his shoes are really polished. And do you know that he's sitting at one of the power tables at one of these restaurants and he ordered the $56 Dover sole? I mean, these are the things that they put in there. And I'm going to go through this article in the New Yorker about Lou Dobbs. But Lou Dobbs' program is growing while most of cable television is shrinking. And it's growing because he's tapped into the vibe that people have about outsourcing, about the middle class being squeezed, about how wages are falling behind, about how jobs are becoming less and less available for a decent wage in America, how homeland insecurity is just that, insecure. When he talks, and some of the stuff that he does on the program I don't agree with, but people are going to the program because he's tapped into something. And that's part of this groupthink mentality where people say, God, the economy's horrible. How many people have heard that the economy is horrible? But it's not. When you look at the unemployment down, home ownership up, prices of homes down somewhat, but still up from where they were. When you look at the statistical analysis of the economy's good, but people in this last election thought the economy was horrible. How is that possible? It's because of this groupthink. And this four-part process, and Dumas, the psychohistorian, calls this basically just pure projection. He outlines this four-part process that the fantasy leader undergoes in relation to the group. At first, the group will see him as unrealistically strong, magically able to unify the group and keep enemies at bay. Certainly, we saw this in the months after September 11th when President Bush was so popular. Remember? President Bush, until September 10, 2001, everybody was like, he's a joke. He's a fraud. The Supreme Court got him in. This guy went from Yale to y'all. He's not capable of everything. But what was the groupthink after September 11, 2001? Is that he was the great savior and protector. He was on the pile with the bullhorn. The people who did this to us will hear from all of us. And people cheered, Republican and Democrat alike, because he tapped into the mood with just that one, as some would say, staged little event. It says here that his popularity had little to do with the actual merits of his policies, but with the public's need to feel safe and the feeling that Bush was going to be the one to protect them. Then he says we move into stage 2, which he calls the cracking stage, when the feelings of magical nurturing begin to deteriorate so that the public's mood begins to feel unstable and dangerous, the leader begins to be experienced as weak, unable to control events. Looking back, he says, I believe that this really started with the successful attacks on President Bush's Thanksgiving trip to Iraq a couple of years ago, but especially after the Terry Schiavo matter. Stage 3, he calls the collapse. It occurs when the public begins to feel that the fantasy leader is helpless to prevent catastrophe, when the group's anxiety has become unhinged and uncontained in a completely unrealistic way. This brings on pure rage, free-floating paranoid fantasies of death and destruction. Thus, we see the president unrealistically blamed and vilified for all sorts of things outside of his control. Homosexual predators, hurricanes, rising but never falling gas prices, global warming, deadly flu pandemics, and the list goes on. He is seen as weak and vulnerable, which triggers a wave of near homicidal anxiety that aims to purify the group by ritual slaying of the divine king, identical to what took place in most primitive tribes. Would you say stage 3 is the collapse? Stage 4 is the fantasy cycle. I'll share that with you right after this. 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, give me a call.
The Jerry Doyle Show. The Jerry Doyle Show. Call Jerry now. 800-876-4123. 800-876-4123.
At some of the works of psychohistorian Lloyd DeMott, talking about how people have this kind of groupthink projection mentality. We're talking about the hatred that people have for President Bush. If you hate President Bush, why? 800-876-4123 is the number. He talks about the 4 stages that get to a certain point with this fantasy hatred, this fantasy leader, this almost cultist mentality that people have out there where it's hip to hate Bush. Talking about phase 1 is where the group sees an unrealistically strong, magically able to unify and keep enemies at bay. That's what we saw on September 11th with President Bush. That would be stage 1. Stage 2 would be the cracking stage, where the feelings of magical nurturing begin to deteriorate. Then he talks about stage 3, which is the collapse, when the public begins to feel that the fantasy leader is helpless to prevent catastrophes. And you can say whatever these catastrophes are. Right now, President Bush is unable to solve the genocide in Darfur, Sudan, Somalia, whether it's people preying on kids, hurricanes, gas prices, global warming, the flu, everything is President Bush's fault. Am I not correct? And this is part of this groupthink mentality where the collapse is taking place in the groupthink out there. They say here one of the geniuses of the American system is that it accounts for both our civilized and our primitive natures. And by holding national elections every 2 years, it provides us with an outlet for primitive anxieties that historically toppled regimes. In other words, it institutionalizes the logic of human sacrifice, which is stage 4 of the group fantasy cycle. They say, no coincidence that President Bush performed a human sacrifice and held up the head of Donald Rumsfeld to the baying mainstream media fantasies on the morning after the election. If you keep up with the ranting of the infantile left or Daily Kos or Huffington Post, nothing less than some form of human sacrifice would have answered their rage. But one thing we know with certainty is it won't work. For magic is a symptom of which it purports to cure. Now, there may be some people out there that actually have a deep-seated hatred for President Bush. But how much of what you're thinking about now ties in with DeMott's theory of these 4 stages, past the collapse, and now the ultimate group fantasy cycle taking place? Because has President Bush not been blamed for everything? And is it possible that it's not all his fault? If you've actually hated Bush to this point but didn't know why, I'd like to hear from you at 800-876-4123. Has your hatred for President Bush been tempered by the fact that maybe you are part of this group thinking, this projection onto this fantasy leader who's not feeling what America is feeling, even though the feelings run contrary to the facts. And this also ties in with Reagan. Why was Reagan so relevant? Is it because he was a great leader, or did he tie in with the Americans' feelings at the time, where they wanted someone to be a leader, where they someone to talk about the shining city on the hill, where they wanted to be proud to be an American again after the demoralization of the Americans being held hostage in Iran for 444 days under Jimmy Carter. 800-876-4123 is the number. San Francisco, California. Charlie, KNEW Line 6. Charlie, you're on the program.
Hi, Mr. Doyle. I enjoy your show. I'm a student, and I am a history major. I don't hate Bush. However, I am very, very confident that he will go down in history as the worst president the United States has ever had.
Based upon what he's done, what others have done with him, the surroundings that he's trying to work in, I mean, that's a pretty big statement. I mean, of all the presidents we've had, 43, he's the worst.
Out of all the presidents, I'm confident he's the worst. He calls himself a patriot. I think he is far from a patriot. I think that he should have studied a little more history instead of business when he spent his very few years in school. Again, this is a man, I wasn't going to vote for him or not. I ended up voting for him, and I greatly regret it. It's just, just look at history. I mean, we have empires over time that have fallen because they expanded too long, and I don't see why we feel the need. I understand economic exploitation of Iraq, but I mean, if we really cared about setting up a democracy, there's other places we could have done so. I don't see the need to go into Iraq.
All right, Charlie, let me ask you this question. I know this is going to be hard to do, but I want an honest answer from you. Let's take Iraq and Afghanistan off the table. Would you still feel the same way about President Bush?
That I feel he'd be the worst president?
Yeah.
Probably not, to be honest. I would still feel that he'd be a poor president, but possibly not the worst it ever had. I mean, a mistake is a mistake, I agree. However, when a mistake is countless lives, I think you draw a line between where's a mistake and what's actually, you're just wrong.
Right, and I don't want to make a commercial for the Republican Party here, but when you take a look at interest rates, inflation, the stock market, home ownership, gas prices coming down, record unemployment, the list goes on. I mean, when you look here domestically, things are pretty good. So I would have to say that I know it's hard to separate Iraq and Afghanistan from this administration because this is how this administration will be judged. And they should be judged harshly. Even though we won the war, we even have Democrats saying we won the war. Jack Murtha says we won the war. Pelosi says we've won the war. Republicans alike have said that we've won the war. While we did win the war, we did not have the things in place to plan for what the aftermath would be. And then we go around giving out, crosses to people who decided to disassemble the Iraq army and the security forces, to have them stand down and to create 300,000 unemployed, in any given moment in time. But when you look at this Iraq situation, this is how Bush is going to be judged. But a lot of where we are today in Iraq is because of events that led us to going there in the first place. It's the decimation of human intelligence that we had in the CIA, which happened under Clinton. And all I'm trying to point out is that this focus that's on the George Bush and the hatred of George Bush, did he woefully mismanage the war? Not directly, but indirectly by not putting people in place that would be held accountable to get the job done. How do you not plan for these? How do you not know about this? How do you not have equipment ready? How do you not listen to your... I mean, there's a lot of things that he did wrong here. But in this hatred of President Bush, I think this is a capsulization of where the mood of the nation is at the time. I'm not giving him a pass by any stretch, Charlie. I think he should be held accountable for the fact that he isn't holding others accountable. But when you look at this, there's a hatred out there that's almost hip. And I just don't know if it's going to do us any good. Thanks, Charlie. 800-876-4123 is the number. The New Yorker magazine, not a love fest on Lou Dobbs. Lou Dobbs tonight on CNN. I'll share that with you. And we'll continue the love-hate fest for George Bush. Jerry Doyle, give me a call.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Learn more at TalkRadioNetwork.com.
We're going to stay in Iraq so long as the government wants us there.
Did you inhale?
That was the point.
We have to draw definitions. What is off color, what is blue, and what is out and out dirty.
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Jerry Doyle grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Has a 10-year career on Wall Street. A long list of movie and TV roles, including the character Michael Garibaldi for 110 episodes on the Emmy Award-winning sci-fi series Babylon 5. He's an honorary naval aviator and F-16 test pilot.
If I break it, they can take it out of my pay.
He ran as a Republican for the U.S. House of Representatives in California.
Either I'm dead right or I'm crazy.
You want to talk politics, pop culture, and current events?
Oh, yes. I need the distraction.
Let's do it on the Jerry Doyle Show.
Well, let's take the man up on his offer and do it on the Jerry Doyle Show. JD here, your 6'3" ATM of information. The PIN, 800-876-4123. Danson, Charles, and Jesse working the boards. D-Squared, grabbing your phone calls at 800-876-4123. Emails at the website, jerrydoyle.com. The program where intellectual anarchy is encouraged and nurtured. Poll question. Do you believe the 700-mile fence along the U.S.-Mexican border will ever be built? 86%. 14%. It was 17%, guys. We're gaining a little bit there. We're convincing people it will never be built. Convincing people along the lines of this discussion about hatred in America today. We know Hollywood hates Republicans. We know they hate President Bush. We played some audio of Roseanne talking about how much she hates President Bush. We had audio from Bette Midler, and the list goes on, of people who have this hatred for President Bush. But really, what's the hatred all about? Let's take a look at some other people that were revered and reviled over the course of our political recent history. Ronald Reagan. He was loved. And even people who would always say, oh, Ronald Reagan, Iran-Contra. Ronald Reagan is held in a certain amount of reverence by the political left. Jimmy Carter, held in reverence by the political left, reviled by the political right, and even people on the left knew he wasn't right when it came to the aftermath of the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. So why was Ronald Reagan so popular? Why is he still revered so much at this point in time? Is it because of his politics? Is it because of his beliefs? Or is it that he happened to tap into what America was yearning for? This charismatic, graceful, strong, Arthurian type that would just say, this is the way it is. This is my vision for America. And when you come out of the dark ages of Jimmy Carter, obviously a guy like Reagan was so refreshing. That's why he'll grab 49 out of 50 states, because he tapped into the mood of the nation. You don't get 49 out of 50 states by just appealing to Republicans. What was so appealing about Ronald Reagan? Was it his core beliefs, or was it his belief in something greater, which is what the country was striving for at the time? Give us your opinion at 800-876-4123. On C-SPAN, Jimmy Carter was being interviewed. He's out there promoting his new book. A caller came in from Aurora, Illinois, obviously not a fan of Jimmy Carter. Listen to this clip.
Aurora, Illinois.
Yes, Mr. Carter, thank you for making me a Republican. Because of your incompetence in handling the Iranians with stagflation, and you're cozying up with every dictator, thug, and Islamic terrorist there is. But more importantly, I find it to be vile because your black is heart. It's heart because you're an anti-Semite. And let me explain why I think you're a bigot, a racist, and an anti-Semite. No hope.
I think, caller, that the name calling is fine, is okay. Enough. Thank you.
I think the name calling is enough. Now obviously he had an agenda. He had a hatred for Jimmy Carter. But when you look at this article over the weekend about Ahmadinejad talking about how Israel will disappear, in a joint press conference with the Palestinian prime minister, he basically said, look, today's scores of Western politicians in doubt as to the future of Israel, its regime, the existence has come under question. There's no doubt the Palestinian nation and Muslims as a whole will emerge victorious. And he said the continued commission of crimes by the Zionist regime will speed up the collapses of this fictitious regime. Now, there are people out there polled in Canada, Mexico, Britain, Spain, that fear Bush, hate Bush, more than they hate Ahmadinejad. Why is that? 800-876-4123 is the number. In this hatred that's taking place out there, it's the mood. It's what the psychohistorian Dumas talks about in the 4 stages. We talked about them briefly. I'll run through them again quickly. The 4 stages of this perceived leader that has to tie in with what the mood of the nation is. And President Bush gets blamed for everything. Hurricanes, the whole thing, you name it. He gets blamed for everything. because for whatever reason, it doesn't look like he's leading. But yet after September 11, 2001, he was the great savior, was he not? How many Democrats out there, honestly, when they saw him on the pile? Do you have the audio of that, Jesse? Give me the audio when he was on the pile down there at Ground Zero. When he was on the pile at Ground Zero, and outside the people, the loons are going to call and say it was a staged event because the Bush administration had everything to do with bringing down the towers and flying the missile into the Pentagon, not a plane. I get it. Don't call. But when he made those comments, this was a guy who was a buffoon to many on September 10th, but yet people wanted to follow him on September 11th because of what? Was it because of what he said? Was it because of where he was? Or was it because he tapped into the mood of the nation? Listen.
Thank you all.
Go get him, George!
I want you all to know it can't go any louder. I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
I mean, you listen to the response there, and the people that did this to us will hear from all of us. He tapped into the mood of the nation. The mood of the nation, much different now. President Bush, the recipient of this projection of hatred. DeMar talking about this four-part process. He says, first, the group sees him as an unrealistically strong, magically able to unify the group and keep enemies at bay. There we just had it, September 11, 2001. The second phase is where things start to crack. It's where the magical nurturing begins to deteriorate. The third stage is the collapse, when the public begins to feel that the fantasy leader is helpless to prevent catastrophe. The catastrophes he talks about: sexual predators, hurricanes, rising gas prices, global warming, flu pandemics, the list goes on. He's seen as weak and vulnerable, and is he not that very same thing now? And the fourth stage of the group fantasy cycle is where the outlets take place, and they did so in the midterm elections. This hatred for President Bush is a reflection of what the mood of the nation is. And this is why we have to figure out what's really going on here. Who do you think is going to emerge as the next man on the pile? What is the mood of the nation now? What do people want to hear from the leaders? When I look at, we have Lou Dobbs on the program from time to time. I like his program. Lou Dobbs Tonight on CNN, expanded to 7 nights a week. There's a reason that his numbers are increasing while most of cable television is shrinking. Is it because of the segments that he does on the war on the middle class? Is there really a war on the middle class? Is it because of his segment on broken borders? Do we have broken borders? Yeah, that's pretty much a given. Homeland insecurity? We haven't had an attack on our soil since September 11, 2001. Is the homeland really that insecure? He does a segment called Exporting America. Yes, we are outsourcing a lot, but we also have 4.6% unemployment, which is basically statistical full employment in this country. He does a segment called The Best Government Money Can Buy. Do we have corrupt politicians? Yeah. Are they all corrupt? No. We know them. We have some of them on the program who are trying to do what's in the best interest of the American people. So he's tapping into a mood out there. What's the mood he's tapping into? That the borders are being run rampant with terrorists and illegals. That homeland is insecure. At any moment, your building is going to be blown up. That there's a war on the middle class, that at any moment you're going to lose your job and be homeless. That jobs are being exported in America and you'll never be able to find a good job. And the best government that money can buy is going right down the crapper. That's what he's tapped into. There's statistical evidence to prove that in a lot of cases he's wrong. But what he's right in is tapping into the mood of the American people, the groupthink mentality. Whether it's Carter, Reagan, Bush, Lou Dobbs, the list of people that are successful or fail is because of the success of understanding what the mood of the groupthink is out there. I'm going to explore this more with you. Join me, 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Stand up and be heard now on The Jerry Doyle Show.
I think it's perfectly reasonable.
We all know you're out there. Can you feel the resistance? Can you feel the thunder?
Jerry Doyle Show.
Bob in San Francisco, KNEW, line 4. Bob, thanks for holding. You're on the program.
Great, Jerry, thanks. The DeMoss theory really does capture the political cycle of emotions, but it really misses the source for that. The fundamental fantasy that we're operating under here is that government can be the source for the people's happiness. This nation was founded on, the principle of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness coming from self-governance, self-reliance, and self-generation. We're losing sight of the fact that we, the people, are the leader. This human condition of avoiding risk and thereby avoiding responsibility, abdicating to government, objectifying our government, and then pretending that we're victims of the government has us existing in this self-imposed helplessness. We're inviting tyranny and totalitarianism to come on in.
You look at how Reagan turned the mindset of the Carter era when you look at what we were feeling as a nation, not necessarily personally going through, but there was a certain, big government. In Carter, there was, look back, it was at 18% inflation. There was 21% interest rates. You could get it back then. You could get a AAA insured municipal bond, non-callable for 14.25%. You saw soaring real estate prices. We saw the Iranian hostage crisis, 444 days of doing nothing. And then you hear a guy like Reagan come along. Now, what was Reagan's, where did his fame come from? The fact that he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild for 2 times, or the fact that he was governor of California 2 times? I don't think that it would have really mattered. I think that's the personality of a Barack Obama today, where people are saying, I'm feeling something different. I'm feeling something fresh. I'm feeling a newness. And after Carter, listen to Ronald Reagan in this first clip talking about free markets and communism, and think about what the mood of America was in 1979, and then listen to Reagan saying this.
The principles of wealth creation transcend time, people, and place. Governments would deliberately subvert them by denouncing God, smothering faith, destroying freedom, and confiscating wealth, have impoverished their people. Communism works only in heaven where they don't need it, and in hell where they've already got it.
You hear that, Bob, and people go, wow, it was a complete sea change of ideology. And even if people had problems with Reagan, the Republican, winning 49 out of 50 states, he didn't do it just Republicans voting for him. They were voting for his attitude, his newness, his freshness. And I think this hatred of Bush is exemplified by DeMoss theory. And looking at this projection onto this fantasy leader that people expect Bush to be, but in fact what we're seeing in the reversal of the polls in the midterm election was not as much a reflection of Bush or the Republican policies and principles. It's a reflection of the mood of the nation, that the people just aren't getting it. Thanks, Bob. 800-876-4123 is the number. Is part of this piece here about DeMoss. He said, with regard to a fantasy leader, it's almost like an Oedipal parent. The process is much more primitive, involving the need for pre-Oedipal projection and containment. Using this method, he says, one would not say that President Bush has a 35% approval rating, but what does he really have? He has a 65% toxicity rating. But the toxicity, he says, is a measure of how much unconscious material is being projected into him by a large segment of the group. He said, this is one of the reasons it's so wearying to be president, because it involves day-to-day processing of such irrational projection of hatred and anxiety. I said, imagine what, therapists have to go through dealing with just one borderline patient in their practice. But it's almost as if the president must deal with the projections of 50 million or so difficult patients who are irrationally experiencing him as evil incarnate. And have we not heard President Bush be talked about as evil incarnate? He said the president must be a receptacle for continuous projections from various levels of emotion, immaturity, and unreality. In the case of Bush, who tends not to fight back and engage with those projections, it only makes that part of the population more enraged with him, just as a borderline patient would feel outraged if the therapist didn't take their projections seriously, no matter how distorted. And is that not where we're at with Bush? That we've gone past the fracture, we've gone past the collapse. Now it's in the all-out call for Bush's head. The hatred of President Bush. When you look at how much of the population out there right now is acting like a borderline patient who's not being validated by their therapist, you can understand where we're at in this anger and hatred towards Bush. It says one of the difficult things about being a therapist is holding the patient's negative projections. You cannot just say, I'm not your father who abused you, I'm me. Rather, you must patiently tolerate being Dr. Evil while helping them discover the psychic truth behind their own projections. Fascinating to note here that the left is so out of touch with their fantasies about President Bush that one constantly reads about how they imagine that he is fighting back in the most dangerous and extreme way, that he doesn't tolerate dissent, that he questions people's patriotism, that he is destroying our civil rights, that he punishes ideological enemies. Is that not where we're at? If there's somebody out there that has this hatred for President Bush or all things Republican, does this not put it in a different context for you? Is this not the group mood of the nation? If we took a giant mood ring and held it up, this would be what it would look like, because it's completely different from reality. We haven't had ad nauseum hurricanes. We don't have out-of-control inflation. We don't have people losing jobs in record numbers, although, yes, we have lost 3 million manufacturing jobs under the Bush administration since he came in 2000. But we also have increases in efficiency. We have higher productivity. We're getting more from the workers, even though some people say workers are getting less in real wages. Why are we getting less? Because of illegal aliens. They're driving down labor. So this all is the frustrations of the borders, of budgets, of fiscal insanity, of us not unleashing the military. There's a great piece written by Jonah Goldberg in the LA Times. It's not losing that we hate. It's losing. Not the war. It's losing the war. It's losing the lives. It's not the war itself. The hatred right now of what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan is not the fact that it's war. It's the fact that we're losing. And that's what people are all about. But why are we losing? Because people have a disdain for war. But yet that very disdain turns around, and then we end up hating the person who, if we had to unleash the hounds in the beginning and just completely decimated Baghdad, he'd be the very guy that would be receiving. How could you possibly do that? Do this. Call me, 800-876-4123, Jerry Doyle.
The Jerry Doyle Show. The Jerry Doyle Show.
Your turn.
The middle class is being destroyed. Where's your documentation?
I thought we didn't need documentation, Rosa.
You're talking. You said
Oh, wait a minute. Whoa. Now you want documentation, Rosa? Please. I'm hurt.
Being destroyed.
My feelings are hurt.
Little Lou Dobbs there is doing a town hall meeting. I believe it was in San Antone. It's about illegal immigration, and it's part of the piece written in the New Yorker magazine. Magazine? Auld Lang. I was ready to do Auld Lang Syne and magazine together. Do you ever put two words together? I seem to be doing that more and more. I don't know. I may have to have my bolts tightened. 800-876-4123 is the number. In the New Yorker magazine, I sound like Larry the Cable Guy. Get her done. I know. You guys hate Larry the Cable Guy. If there's hatred in the booth, it's for Larry the Cable Guy. I personally find him to be funny. 800-876-4123 is the number. Yeah. Old Man Gene, WFTL, down in Palm Beach, Florida. Gene, you're on the program.
Hey, Jerry, the history book that you've been reading from is very interesting. The guy takes a lot of numbers, statistics, and things that have happened, and he applies different ways of analyzing them, and he comes up with conclusions. They're very nice. But the thing that is in force right now that is hurting President Bush 43, is Mein Kampf. That book was written a long time ago, and it was not written about history. It was written about history to be. And what the Führer said was that you start lying about somebody and keep lying about them, and lie about somebody important to begin with and bring them down. And once you've done that, and the press has helped you, they become party to a conspiracy to raise your efforts. And this is what has been going on in this country for a while. And
I mean, you look at the fact that Hugo Chavez is lauded when he comes to this country, and thankfully, we saw some people lash back at him. Charlie Rangel being one of them. Don't come to my district, don't come to my country, and vilify my president. But he was lauded by the international community at the United Nations, and you look at the rise of the popularity. I don't know how this is popular. Ahmadinejad writing the letter last week to the Americans. My dear noble Americans, it was a seductive love letter, and this is all part of getting people involved in this collusional and delusional way of trying to undermine our government.
Press has become an unwitting or perhaps a purposeful, maybe a conspirator in doing this, and it is not a joke, and it is something that is very deliberately going on, and you can see it if you look at it, and if you don't want to see it, you will never see it. Now, talk about where they started. They started out by lying about Bush when he was still running for president. They call him a moron. Well, obviously, he wasn't a moron. He was much smarter than they because he managed to win. Then they lied about how he won. He won. He wasn't chosen. He wasn't elected. He was chosen. He was selected. And they kept that mantra up and kept it going and kept it going and kept it going. And as people in the press joined them, they became co-conspirators. They could not get out of it anymore. They were conspirators along with the Democrats, who I call the communists, because that's who they are. They're the very, very left-wing part of the Democrats.
But not all Democrats, Gene. I mean, I think they're good, solid, and this is part of political polarization. When the people refer to Democrats as communists, and I know you're not talking about Democrats in total. You're talking about fringe elements of the Democrat Party, the extreme far left, just as I find equally complicit the extreme far right that has the agendas ahead of the nation for their own political party. And that's where we get into trouble, when we start to cater to the extreme elements at the expense of the moderate middle, which is what I believe most of the country is, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, red or blue. It doesn't matter. Majority are moderate. Majority of people have the same understandings, but they get marginalized by people that go out there and use wedge issues to try and say that's the definition of a nation. Gods, gays, guns, abortion, flag-burning amendments. Things like that didn't sell. The Republican base didn't buy it in the midterm because the Republicans didn't understand what the mindset was of the average American out there.
With you on this, I don't think that most of the country is in the middle. Most of the country is on the right. Even among Democrats, most of the country is on the right. And that you can see that because Hillary Clinton, the most leftist Marxist that there is, and my mother calls her the devil, she is running towards the center, even towards the right.
Well, for now, but we all know that eventually she'll return back to her favorite place. Now, maybe not. Maybe what's going to happen here. I appreciate the call, Gene. Maybe what's going to happen now is that because the Republicans got decimated in the midterms, losing the House and the Senate and losing a lot of governorships, maybe what's going to happen is that the Republicans are going to have to be more beholden to the electorate than to the political party. That, in turn, might then force the Democrats to have to follow along the lines of the candidates that Schumer and Emanuel brought forward to try and keep the country more towards the center. Hillary Clinton may look like she's moving center or right of center, but eventually she will return to what her roots are, because in a political cycle, she is going to be tired, she's going to be worn down, she's going to be pulled out by a number of different factions, and the reality of who the person is will come out. Now, maybe if she pairs herself with a Barack Obama, that might be a winning ticket for the Dems in 08. It might very well be. But if the Republicans don't understand, this isn't about getting the Republican Party back in power. This is about getting back to the principles that put the Republicans in power in 1994. That's how they will get the power back, by understanding that they have to give it back to the people. The people will in turn reward the party with election successes if they get it right by the country first. 800-876-4123 is the number. Let's go to California. Susan, KNEW, line 5. Susan, you're on the program.
Hi. The reason that I'm calling is that I'd like to tell you about my experience in observing George Bush, and I think a lot of people are variations of what I think. And when I saw him at 9/11 standing in front of what was left of the World Trade Center and all the residue and speaking to the people, I was on the same page with him, and I felt that he was our leader and that he was credible. But in the time since then, I have watched our country being sold out to globalism little by little. I've been watching our schools deteriorate. I've been watching laws get passed without anybody realizing what's transpiring. I'm watching how they're going to be building that road that goes up the middle of the country, taking away people's property rights, just everything that I am not for, watching my country go away. I know that George Bush is a part of that process, and that when he gets up and talks, it has nothing to do with the American people. It's just like any puppet is going to get up and say words that are supposed to make us feel like, that we're still a country and that we're going to support one person or another who's going to speak to us. And I think from here on in, no matter who's president, whether it's George Bush or McCain or Hillary or anybody that follows him, there's going to be a huge disconnect from the people, because we all see what's happening little by little, and we don't like it, and we feel like our hands are tied behind our backs, and people are trying to do something about it in every little way that they can. But overall, there's nothing stopping the machine that's taking our country apart.
And in the elements that you broke down there, Susan, I mean, whether or not you're factual on any of them, all of them, doesn't matter. It's what people think. Do I think George Bush is a globalist? I talk about how Hillary Clinton will ultimately show her stripes when she gets worn down on the campaign trail. Think President Bush when he went down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina for the 10th time. Now, if you don't think George Bush is a globalist, Jesse, do you have that audio? Let me know. Jess is going to pull this audio. This is those little insights into the mindset of the person. Bush, 10th trip to New Orleans, comfortable in the region, tired from his travels. When he talks about the people in New Orleans, he slips. And this is very crucial, Susan, because you say he's a globalist, I say he's a globalist, and in this clip, he proves that he's a globalist.
To make sure I fully understand the strategies that the local folks are putting in place to help the good people of this part of the world recover from the devastating storm.
So he's talking about the good people in this part of the world. This is the President of the United States in New Orleans, in Louisiana, for the 10th time, and he refers to those people as from this part of the world. Bush is a globalist.
Absolutely, and globalism is coming, and the United States is no longer going to be the United States in short order, whether it's 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. I don't know how long it's going to take for them to totally dismantle it. But when you start watching what's going on from that point of view, you can really see it happening. And I think, there's still people who are asleep to that fact. There's some people that are too busy going about their lives trying to make a dollar and not really listening carefully to what's being said and what's being done. And I don't think President Bush has anything at all to do with what's going on as far as the...
Well, let me just Susan, I don't share your pessimism for the future of the country. I don't think America can be broken. I don't think it's a physical place. I think it's a state of mind. And I think people are hip to the fact that we have seen this globalist agenda, that we have seen outsourcing, that there has been a squeeze on the middle class, that we do see the attempts to have this connection between Mexico, the United States, and Canada with the superhighway that they're talking about. The information is all there. But I think people will brush back against that. And I think the midterm elections were not so much a referendum against the Republicans or necessarily the war in Iraq. I think what the midterm elections was about this vibe, that people feel that there's something not quite right with the country, that the interests of America are not put first, that the interests of the average taxpayer are not put first. When you can make excuses for 12 to 20 million illegal aliens in this country, when you can say that the laws of the land don't matter, but yet you, Susan, and others, you have to continue to pay your taxes. I think people are getting this vibe that there's something quite wrong. And unfortunately for the Republicans, they were the recipients of people pushing back against what they say is the wrong direction. That's why a program like Lou Dobbs Tonight is so successful on CNN. His numbers are soaring while most of cable television is decreasing. Why? Because most of cable TV is what, Susan? Republicans are good, Democrats are bad. Or Democrats are the saviors, Republicans are evil. And that's pretty much how that's been carved up. But someone like him, who goes after the middle class's plight, who goes after outsourcing, who goes after all of these different things, the borders, homeland security, the best government money can buy. He's tapping into a vibe that people have, and that's why his program is successful, and that's why you see other talk shows, TV shows, ratings down year over year, because they're tired of being preached to. The choir is shrinking. They want new songs in the hymnals. They want the songs and the rhetoric to match the sentiment of the country. That's why Reagan was successful in the aftermath of Jimmy Carter. That's why Clinton was successful in being able to communicate with the American people. Bush came in, and the only reason Bush got in was because what was the sentiment of the country after 8 years of Clinton-Gore? They were tired of Clinton-Gore. Gore tried to disconnect himself from Clinton, even in campaigning, although towards the end he tried to use Clinton to help him get elected. The American people were sending a message, a vibe, that we're tired of Clinton's business as usual, whether they were right or not. And that's how Bush got in, because if they had to capitalize on the successes of the Clinton administration, Al Gore would have won in a landslide. George Bush would have not been in the position to have the Supreme Court intervene in a presidential election. It's the vibe of the people. That's why Dobbs' show is doing so well, because he gets it. Thanks, Susan. I appreciate the call. 800-876-4123 is the number. The New Yorker magazine took Dobbs to task about his program. But like any juvenile reporter, this Ken Auletta has to go after Dobbs personally. He's not understanding why the program is successful. He talks about Lou Dobbs' shoes. He talks about the booth that he eats in at the restaurant and how much he pays for Dover sole. He talks about his ranch where he raises horses. And do you know what? He's a gun collector. I'm going to break this down for you when we get back. 800-876-4123. Jerry Doyle, stick with me.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Stand up and be heard now on The Jerry Doyle Show. The Jerry Doyle Show.
You know, you look at the success of certain programs out there, and there's a reason. It's like people understand what the vibe of America is. You look at the success of Lou Dobbs' program, Lou Dobbs Tonight on CNN. We've had him on the program numerous times. There's been times when we've disagreed with his opinions, but yet there's something that he gets that the American people are feeling. Ties in with the DeMaw, psychohistorian, about how there are cycles and projection and fantasy leaders. Lou Dobbs right now is leading the mantra of people out there that have real fears about communist China, real fears about American jobs being sent overseas, real fears about shrinking wages, real fears about the squeeze on the middle class, border insecurity. The list goes on. The New Yorker, article written by Ken Auletta, it's titled Mad as Hell, Lou Dobbs' Populist Crusade. So you'd think he'd break down the show. He'd say, okay, here's why Lou Dobbs' show is successful. Same thing with O'Reilly. Why is O'Reilly's show so successful on Fox? Because he just cuts it the way it is. This is the way it is. This is my opinion. I think you're hosing the American people. He gets it off his chest. People respond to it. They understand when they see agendas. They know when people are trying to pull one over on them. Dobbs sets the mark clear. He goes after what people are feeling in this country, is that there's a squeeze on people. And as Susan, our caller from California, said, at the expense of who? The middle class. And who's getting richer? The fat cats. All the corporate buddies, all the friends of Bush, friends of the institution, friends of Republicans and Democrats alike that leave Congress and go become lobbyists, make millions of dollars. We all understand what's happening out there. The reason his program is successful is because he gets what the American people are getting. And he thinks the American people are getting hosed, and so do the American people, even though that might not be true. It might be groupthink. But this author of this piece in the New Yorker, he doesn't talk about stuff like that. He doesn't talk about DeMaw. He doesn't talk about groupthink. He doesn't talk about projection. He doesn't talk about the 4 stages. He talks about Lou Dobbs. He says, Regular viewers might be surprised at the venue that Dobbs chose for lunch not long ago, the Grill Room of the Four Seasons, a midtown bastion of the very same political and business elites that he denounces daily on his television program. Here's how he talks about this guy, Dobbs. His town car leaves him at the door on East 52nd Street. The restaurant's co-owner, Julian Nicolini, embraced him that day as warmly as when he welcomed, among others, Steve Schwartzman, the chairman and CEO of the Blackstone Group, dun dun dun, Nelson Peltz, the CEO of Trian Partners, Edgar Bronfman Sr., former chairman and CEO of Seagram's, and Mort Zuckerman, real estate developer and publisher of the News. Nicolini led Dobbs to one of 5 choice banquets, and Dobbs settled in, looking very much at home. Dobbs, 61, chubby face with a rosy glow, his blonde hair is lacquered in place, his black wingtips impeccably buffed. It's the kind of welcome one might have expected from an earlier incantation of Lou Dobbs, the Harvard-educated author of CNN's Money Lines. And he goes through all of the he's like, do you know he lives on a 300-acre ranch in Sussex, New Jersey? No. Do you know that he drives around in a town car?
No.
Do you know that he's 6'2" and imposing? Do you know that he's for gun control? He's against gun control? That he actually has a gun collection?
No.
This guy goes totally out of his way to say that Dobbs sits down and orders the $56 Dover Sole. This is all about him trying to say, see, he's not really one of you. He's not really about what you're all about. This author's attempt is to separate Dobbs from the success of his program, which is the fact that he gets what most people are getting out there, and that's why he's successful. But if he can try and remind you of the fact that he eats $56 Dover Sole, and he has a town car, and he polishes his shoes, obviously the show must all be a ruse. Not so. Lots to get to in this article. We'll have to do it tomorrow. And when I go to New York, the 18th of this month, I'm going to the Grill Room at the Four Seasons.
No.
I don't think I'm going to get the same banquet
Jerry.
as Lou. Hey, let's call Lou, see if he can help me out with a table at the Four Seasons. Jerry Doyle, I got to go. Take care.
The Jerry Doyle Show. Go to TalkRadioNetwork.com for more information.